Have you ever had the strange feeling that you're living someone else's life, as if everything you show is just a performance? And what if I told you that what you hide is exactly what defines you the most? Who are you when no one is watching?
In this video, you're going to understand why your identity might be fragmented, how your shadow sabotages, and why the mask you wear to be accepted may slowly be killing you. But be warned, what you're about to discover might not be beautiful. It might be the beginning of an internal collapse. But maybe, for the first time, you're about to see who you truly are. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and comment below. Have you ever achieved something only after you finally stopped trying? Let's go to the video. From an early age, the child perceives something no one teaches with words, but that gets imprinted on the body like an invisible tattoo. There are parts of the self that are welcome and parts that are not. The child understands, even without understanding, that some emotions must be hidden, some desires must be suppressed, reactions that, if exposed, will result in rejection. It is in this moment, subtle yet decisive, that the construction of the persona begins. The central concept from Carl Jung to describe the mask we wear to adapt to society. It's not an accessory, it's a strategy for emotional survival. The persona doesn't come from falsehood, but from necessity. Throughout childhood, the individual learns which behaviors earn affection, acceptance, praise, and which ones bring rejection, criticism, silence. Little by little, they refine this performance like an actor rehearsing lines in front of a mirror. They begin to smile even without wanting to appear strong even when they're in pieces, to say yes when everything inside screams no. And the more applauded this role is, the more the authentic self retreats to the backstage of consciousness. To Jung, the persona is a bridge between the individual and the outer world. It is functional, necessary. Without it, we would be socially dysfunctional, incapable of performing the many roles life demands. Professional, friend, child, partner. The persona organizes interaction with society, gives shape to coexistence. But the problem isn't using it. The problem is forgetting it's a mask. And that's exactly what happens when the mask fuses to the skin and you begin to believe it is you. How many people do you know who always seem fine? Always smiling, composed, productive. Perfect faces in social showcases. Automatic repetitions of positive phrases. Impeccable postures that never bend. But behind the rigidity of the persona, there's often a muted despair, a suffocated soul, a silent scream from someone who no longer knows where the role ends and the person begins. Jung saw this as a severe psychic risk. When the persona becomes the ego, identity collapses silently. In that state, the persona is no longer a tool, it becomes a prison. It censors desires, sabotages creative impulses, represses legitimate emotions. What doesn't fit into the acceptable narrative of the mask is sent to the basement of the unconscious. Anger becomes silence. Vulnerability turns into sarcasm. Sadness disguises itself as efficiency. And little by little, the person becomes a social avatar, disconnected from their true center, anesthetized by an image that no longer represents their essence. But why do we do this? Because, for Jung, the fear of exclusion is as ancient as humanity itself. To be rejected by the group was, in an archaic past, a synonym for death. The psyche carries that ancestral fear, even when there's no real danger anymore. That's why we bow, we mold ourselves, we edit who we are. And throughout that process, we trade authenticity for belonging. The praise we receive is not for us, it's for the mask. And each applause it gets is a small funeral for the genuine self. The drama intensifies when, in moments of crisis, a loss, an illness, a failure, the persona begins to crack. And what emerges beneath it is not immediate clarity, but confusion. Because we've spent so long playing a role that we've forgotten who we were before the stage. Jung saw this fracture as a precious opportunity. When the mask falls, the real process of individuation can begin. It's the moment to look inward, not to define yourself, but to rediscover. Living without a persona is impossible, but living only through it is unbearable. The balance Jung proposes is the conscious recognition of the mask. To know it exists, to use it with purpose, but not to fully identify with it. The persona should serve the individual, not the other way around. And this is the beginning of a radical journey. To trade the illusion of control for the truth of self-knowledge. To begin dancing with what we were taught to hide. And, little by little, to remember that you are not the character you learned to be, but the one who had the courage to stop pretending. Have you ever felt anger towards someone for a reason you couldn't even explain? Have you ever caught yourself acting in a way that didn't seem like you? Have you ever hated in another exactly what you hide in yourself? For Jung, none of this is by chance. This is the shadow, the dark side of the personality, formed by everything that was excluded from consciousness because it was unacceptable, unwanted, or inconvenient. But what is denied does not disappear. It simply learns to hide. The shadow is born from the same process that gives rise to the persona. To be accepted, we learn from an early age what we can show and what we must hide. Emotions considered ugly, such as envy, sadness, selfishness, or desire, are buried in the unconscious. But contrary to what we'd like to believe, the unconscious is not a cemetery. It is an overcrowded prison, and everything that's inside it pulses, breathes, lives, and sooner or later, it escapes. The shadow doesn't show up with a name tag. It manifests indirectly, in a sharp word, in a burst of jealousy, in a criticism that hurts more than it should. It shows up in projections. When we judge in others what we can't stand in ourselves. That arrogant coworker, that emotionally fragile relative, that friend who always wants attention. Maybe they're just distorted reflections of what we've tried to suppress inside us. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the shadow isn't only what we despise. It's also what we silence out of fear of not being loved. How many times have you stopped yourself from expressing a creative idea, a true opinion, or a legitimate desire, just to stick to the script? Many gifts are lost in this psychic exile. The shadow holds not only the monsters, but also the denied potentials. Courage, sensuality, strength, independence, vulnerability. All of them may have been locked away because, at some point, they were seen as dangerous. Ignoring the shadow does not weaken it, it strengthens it. The more we repress it, the more it seeps in. And when it takes over, it begins to sabotage. Relationships implode. Decisions are made on impulse. Anxiety rises without explanation. The individual senses that something inside is wrong, but doesn't know what. That's when the shadow begins to rule from behind the ego, wearing the illusion of rational control. It is chaos dressed as normality. To Jung, integrating the shadow is the true work of the soul. But be warned, integrating doesn't mean surrendering to it, nor justifying destructive behaviors. It means looking at what exists there, naming it, embracing it, giving it form. It means admitting, yes, I feel anger. Yes, I am contradictory. Yes, I have sides I don't understand. And from that acceptance, beginning to build a new relationship with your own unconscious. A relationship rooted in lucidity. Encountering the shadow is always uncomfortable, because it doesn't just reveal what we hide. It shows who we pretend to be. It exposes the gap between the persona and the self. But paradoxically, it's in that discomfort that transformation begins. The shadow is the key to wholeness, because it forces us to reconcile opposites. Light and darkness, virtue and vice, order and chaos. Jung didn't propose perfection. He proposed integration. In the end, the shadow is not an enemy. It is a guide, a distorted mirror that, if we have the courage to face, leads us to a freedom that no longer depends on applause or appearances. The freedom to be whole. And being whole means this: not only what you love in yourself, but also what you fear. Comment below. I see the shadow. If from today on you are ready to take off the mask, face the shadow, and finally live as who you are, not as who they expected you to be. The silent war, the fragmented identity. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when you observe yourself from the outside, acting, speaking, smiling. But everything feels fake, distant, as if someone else were using your body. It's like being on a stage but forgetting the script. In that instant, a silent question is born like a dangerous whisper. Who am I? For Jung, that question is not a sign of weakness, but of lucidity. It indicates that the artificial structure of the I is beginning to collapse. What we call identity, our beliefs, preferences, personality, may actually be a collage of voices that are not our own. Your father's fear, your mother's expectations, the morality of your church, the rules of your culture, the trauma of your childhood. All of this forms an I that seems solid until the day it falls apart. The human psyche, according to Jung, is not a harmonious unity. It is a fragmented territory, inhabited by parts that coexist, often at war. A rational self that wants stability, an impulsive self that craves disruption, a wounded self that needs care, a sabotaging self that fears success. Each one pulls in a different direction, and what we call inner life is nothing more than the battlefield where these selves fight for control. This multiplicity is not a flaw, it is human nature. But when there is no awareness, the individual lives in chaos, makes decisions they don't understand, says things they don't believe, repeats patterns they despise, and then wonders, why did I do that? The answer lies in the split between the visible self and the unconscious selves. The ego thinks it's in charge, but often it's the most forgotten part of the self that's driving. Jung called this the disintegration of the personality. And though it sounds like a breakdown, it is also an invitation, because before integration can happen, it's necessary to perceive what is separate, what we deny, what we avoid, what we exile within ourselves to maintain the appearance of coherence. Fragmentation hurts, but it reveals. It shows that identity is not static, it is fluid, and that, while frightening, is also liberating. The problem is that we were taught to seek firmness, consistency, to be someone. But what if that's just another trap of the persona? What if, in trying to be coherent, we are killing our complexity? Jung stated, the goal is not to find a fixed essence, but to learn how to live with one's own paradoxes, to embrace inner conflict as part of existence, to stop trying to unify the ununifiable and start listening to the parts that were never heard. There is a subtle pain that comes with awakening, the feeling of falling apart from the inside. But it's in that dissolution that space emerges for something new, not a new role, but a new awareness. One that doesn't deny its contradictions, but dances with them. One that no longer needs to fake consistency, because it has discovered that being whole is far more important than appearing perfect. Identity, in Jung's view, is like a river. It changes, flows, escapes. Clinging to rigid definitions is a battle against one's own nature. True individuation begins when we stop searching for who we are and start listening to who is speaking inside us. There is no final I waiting. There is only a process in constant mutation. And the courage to go through that process is what brings us closer to wholeness. There are moments in life when everything we had under control slips away. A single word breaks us. A situation throws us into disarray. A loss knocks us to the ground. It's in those fragile moments that something unexpected emerges from within. It's not strength. It's not clarity. It's confusion. It's chaos. It's the inferior function, as Jung called it. That part of you that was forgotten, ignored, belittled, but that holds the key to your wholeness. According to Jung, all of us have 4 psychic functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. During the formation of the personality, we develop one of these as dominant and build the ego around it. The other functions arrange themselves into different levels of consciousness, and the one that is most repressed, least accessible, and most clumsy becomes the inferior function. It is, in essence, our blind side. If you are rational, your inferior function is probably raw emotion, the one you try to hide for fear of losing control, but that explodes when you least expect it. If you live through the senses, focused on the concrete, your inferior function may be intuition. That subtle voice you ignore, but that keeps whispering truths that cannot be measured. And that part doesn't go away. It waits, and it acts. What makes the inferior function so important and so dangerous is that it operates in the dark. It does not follow the rules of the ego. It erupts, it invades, it destabilizes, and it does so especially when you are vulnerable, in crisis, in error, in what escapes logic. The inferior function does not respect what you've built. It shows what you avoided becoming. And because of that, it's frightening, because it is the internal opposite. But it is precisely because it is the opposite that it is necessary. Jung believed that wholeness is not achieved through perfection, but through the integration of opposites. The inferior function is the missing link, the part that was lacking. It carries not only the shadow, but also the potential for transformation. Facing it is like descending into the basement of the soul's house, where not only fears are stored, but also forgotten resources. The ego, however, fears this part because it doesn't obey logic. It is unbalanced, childish, primitive. It gets in the way, but it is in getting in the way that it teaches. It shows that control is an illusion, and that growing up requires losing the ground beneath your feet. The inferior function is paradoxically the door to the self, and the self, the center of the psyche, can only be accessed when you agree to look at what you don't understand in yourself. Integrating the inferior function is neither a quick nor a comfortable task. It is a long process, made of listening, humility, and mistakes. But it is also an inevitable process for those who wish to be whole, because as long as it remains unconscious, it will keep sabotaging your relationships, your choices, your peace. When you recognize it, you can begin to have a dialogue. When you welcome it, it stops screaming. The encounter with the inferior function is always a breaking point. But like every true collapse, it can also be a birth. It is there, on the floor, on your knees, confused, maskless, that you finally find something that isn't in the self-help manual or the persona you constructed. You find the forgotten part of yourself. The crossing, integrating to be free. By now, you may have realized the journey inward is not linear nor luminous. It does not deliver easy answers. It offers no guarantees. On the contrary, it disorganizes, exposes, tears open. But it is exactly in this process of internal confrontation that what Jung called individuation begins. The path of becoming who you are, not who the world expected you to be. Integrating the persona, the shadow, and the inferior function is a radical act of courage. Because it's not about fixing anything, it's about recognizing. Seeing that the mask you wear doesn't need to be destroyed, but understood. That the shadow is not an enemy, but a messenger. That the inferior function is not a flaw, but a key. Freedom is not born from eliminating these parts. It is born from reconciling them. But integration requires crossing an abyss, a psychic void, an uncomfortable silence where the old answers no longer serve and the new ones haven't arrived yet. It is the space between who you pretended to be and who you still don't know how to become. And most people give up there because it hurts, because it's frightening, because it's easier to return to autopilot than to sustain the uncertainty of a self under construction. But the price of not crossing that abyss is high. It means living a life where everything seems fine on the outside, but inside, there is a nameless exhaustion, an echo of the self, a constant feeling of inadequacy, even when everything should be okay. Non-integration charges us silently, with anxiety, with exhaustion, with repeated crises, as if the unconscious were screaming, "You can't keep ignoring this." Integration is not an event, it is a process. And like every true process, it requires discipline, repetition, presence. It's not enough to understand intellectually. You have to live it, test, fail, adjust. Look at the shadow when it appears. Recognize the inferior function when it messes everything up. Use the persona consciously, not as a prison, but as a tool. The emotional freedom that Jung proposed is not naive. It's not about feeling good all the time. It's something more mature. It's knowing who is speaking inside you at every moment. It's stopping the automatic reaction and beginning to choose. It's accepting that within you live contradictory forces, and that maturity does not lie in eliminating any of them, but in learning to listen without being dominated by them. True integration demands a shift in how you relate to yourself. It's when you start to say, Yes, I feel all of this. Yes, I am contradictory. Yes, I have parts I still don't understand. And instead of using that as a reason to feel guilty or hide, you begin to use it as a starting point for honesty. For a life where lucidity matters more than image, where depth matters more than performance. Because, in the end, this is what integration means. Bringing together what was separated, uniting light and darkness, bringing back into consciousness what was exiled. And in doing so, not becoming perfect, but becoming real. Not becoming someone new, but finally becoming whole. Being whole is not about being constant. It is not about becoming an improved version of yourself. Being whole means accepting that there are parts of you that are still open wounds, unresolved fears, confused desires. It means admitting that within you coexist both light and poison, and that this coexistence is not a flaw, it is human nature. Jung did not speak of perfection. He spoke of totality, and totality demands radical presence, even in the parts you would rather forget. Most people want to know themselves, but only up to the point where it doesn't hurt. They want peace, that they confuse peace with predictability. They want control, but reject everything that escapes logic. But the truth is that truly knowing yourself is an act of risk, because it requires you to lose. Lose the comfort of blaming others. Lose the masks that worked for years. Lose the bonds that only existed because you pretended to be someone else. But in that risk, freedom is born. Not the childish kind of freedom to do whatever you want, but a mature freedom. The freedom to choose with awareness. The freedom to stop shaping yourself just to be loved. The freedom to hold your contradictions without needing to justify them. The freedom to finally look in the mirror and recognize who is there, not as a performing character, but as a whole, imperfect, real human being. So maybe the question that remains at the end of this journey is no longer, who am I? But am I willing to become someone I do not yet know? Because there is no final version of yourself. There is only process. There is only crossing. And freedom begins exactly when you stop seeking a destination and allow yourself to simply be. Don't leave just yet. I have a proposal for you. If you made it this far, do this. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment with a phrase that makes you reflect. Only those who watch the video until the end will understand the comments. Some may think this was the end, but be careful. The war is not over yet. There are still things that haven't been said. These two videos in front of you are not here by accident. One of them talks about an invisible pattern that might explain why you sabotage yourself exactly when things start going well. But I won't tell you which one it is. You'll have to take the risk and click. So, which one will you choose?